you are a prisoner of your own mind. You can do anything you set your mind to. Literally, like you can just decide I'm going to do a thing, and then you can just go do that thing. No one is stopping you but yourself. Your own mentality is the only thing keeping you from achieving the greatness that you deserve.
Welcome back to another episode of Good Work. My name's Barrett Brooks. I'm your host, and this show is long-form interviews with talented people using their careers to make the world a better place. My guest today is a guy named Fil Aronshtein. He's the founder of Dirac, which is a company that's automating something called work instructions. Now, if you've never heard of that, that makes perfect sense to me. But I really think that you should listen to this episode, even if you're not in the world of startups or manufacturing, which is the topic of the show. Manufacturing is the base layer for the entire physical world around us, whether it's furniture like you can see behind me, or whether it's machinery that powers the world. Dirac is a company that's solving a really important problem that exists in that industry, which is there are designers, something called mechanical engineers, that design mechanisms in something called CAD software. Think of it like Photoshop or Figma, but for the physical world. They make 3D representations of how something should be built. And then that goes to someone on the factory floor, a manufacturing engineer. And that person has to take the design and actually make it out of raw materials. Well, not raw materials, but at least parts. So there's this process that happens in between where someone who's designing something in software might not realize that something is not technically possible when the manufacturing engineer goes to put it together. And the gap between those two things can be as long as 18 or 24 months. So you can imagine if you were building a factory to, let's say, make automobiles, finding out that something you designed doesn't work in practice 2 years later would be a huge problem for business. Now, automobile manufacturers have largely solved that problem, but there's many, many other things in the world that haven't solved that problem. So Dirac makes software that takes the design and automatically builds work instructions in a matter of minutes or at most hours rather than weeks or months. This tightens the cycle time, and that's good for all of us. I talked to Fil about a wide range of topics as usual, but I especially got to talk to him about manufacturing and why it matters. I think this is something many more of us should think more about, and it's something that's a big priority for the American economy going forward, not to mention the global economy. So please enjoy my interview with Fil Aronshtein. I think you're going to love it. Let's get to it. Fil, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Barrett.
It's awesome to have you here. Gave you a great intro already, and I want to jump right in. I was telling you before we got started that the kind of storytelling principle I use for getting started is like right before you got eaten by the bear, is right in the middle of the action is where I like to start. And you've shared this story on a couple of the interviews you've done about how hard it was to get traction early on. You know, you had this vision for kind of reinventing manufacturing, and you wanted to build a robotic manufacturing facility that could kind of solve this problem that we'll get into of this middle volume valley of death. So you have this concept of a factory. You're going to venture capitalists. They're used to like software and massive margins and all of this stuff. And you're pitching them on a thing that honestly, for a lot of them was probably brand new and they didn't understand. And you had over 300 meetings. You know, you talk about some of them being like a joint tour with your buddy Augustus and sitting down with these people and trying to explain what you're doing. And basically you got no traction. And I find that this is a very common experience for founders. Like it's part of what you're signing up for is the hardship of trying to figure out what combination of idea plus communication plus market allows you to gain momentum. And so I want you to take us back to that moment. You know, you get done with that 300th meeting, it's another no, and you're trying to figure out what the hell to do from here. What was that like? And what was the process you followed?
Absolutely. So just to delineate a little bit of chronology here, there was the 300 no's, and then we did the pivoted software, and then a couple months later, Augustus and I tagged up, and then we sort of went on the Great Base American Tour. Yeah, so there was it was sort of that catalyzing moment between those two things. So just hundreds of no's. At the time, I living at home, I would take, if you actually looked at my calendar, I could actually pull it up right now. There was, I would say, I would basically be in this habit of, I would do roughly 8 to 10 VC calls per day. You know, just the back-to-back no. And it got to this point where I was just like a tape recorder. Like I had to pitch down and I would just keep saying the same thing over and over and over and over again. But I would always iterate, right? Like I very much love to learn from reps, right? And that actually gets into a very specific thing that Brett told me. Brett Adcock gave me a piece of advice when I was just in the middle of this, sort of actually in the first half of that, several hundred series of notes. Yeah, I basically said, oh, like, yeah, it really sucks. I've got 200 no's so far in a couple of months. And he said, 200? Try 2,000. Like, you need to go get reps in. And I was like, oh, man, okay, fair enough. Like, I agree, but it was really nice to actually hear somebody affirm that, like, no, you're not an idiot for like bashing your head against the wall and just trying to get enormous amounts of reps in. This is the way to do it. When I was in that, it felt bleak, felt very dark. But once you start to see that you're getting better, that those reps are actually contributing to this compound interest of learning about how to do the thing better, it's remarkable. That's sort of a transformation that I underwent internally, sort of like in that in between phase, where basically I was going to all of these. I was pitching roughly, I think I went to 90 aerospace manufacturers in 6 months. And in that same 6-month period, I was also pitching these several hundred investors. I applied to YC. YC rejected us. I was actually really disappointed in that, where they basically said, I'll pull it up just because I will read it to you because to this day, I'm still like appalled. I'm not going to name the partner. Unfortunately, we decided not to fund Dirac this batch. We liked you guys a lot. And the idea of taking a particular vertical and recreating flex or flextronics for that vertical seems like a very interesting idea. However, you didn't persuade us that manufacturing drones is the right place to start. That being said, there are some positive indicators for the domain. For example, if the government lends you a hand and demands that drones be manufactured in the US. However, that does not seem to be a sure thing. Also, it wasn't obvious to us that you would delve far enough into the economics of the idea to ensure that a third-party drone manufacturer made business sense. These are, we think, all addressable over time as you make progress in your idea. We'd love to see you back with more details, perhaps for next summer's batch. At any rate, these decisions are always difficult, and we wish you very best with the project. And I read that, and I thought, that's crazy. They're and I very much did say during that conversation, the Blue UAS program is a thing. Like there is momentum. I think this was actually right before the Ukraine war began. This was November of 2022. So felt very relevant to me prior to that, but there were obvious tailwinds. So it's just sort of this heavy irony of at the time everybody is saying no, like domestic manufacturing, like globalism won, like we should be offshoring everything to China. Like this is crazy. You need to manufacture drones domestically. The government is going to have to do you a favor. Look, what we're starting to see, especially over the past 6 months, has been this resurgence and a lot of people being very, very excited to work in this space. I would like to say that we've tried very hard to make that happen. But I think there's a lot of the tailwinds behind the reshoring and nearshoring of manufacturing are going to be a boon for a lot of very, very smart people to decide to work on this hard problem again. So in that sort of period of time between, having a lot of these VC rejections and deciding to going on my adventure with Augustus, I started to realize that I don't think that VC is a great mechanism for raising capital for truly large-scale capital-intensive ventures. And I started to realize that, yes, we should build a massively successful software company. And in fact, that might be the best place to start. That doesn't necessarily mean that's where we will end. But in order to actually learn a lot more about how, at a very granular level, these operations are functioning, we can't just try to do this from scratch. We should stand on the shoulders of giants. We should work with people. We should actually improve their processes. We shouldn't just try to build a factory of the future from scratch without having done it before. We should first work with people and help them upgrade to be the factories of the future. And then from the best practices we learn in there, perhaps then we can build our own factory of the future. And that was the mentality that I sort of transitioned into. Yeah, that's sort of a very, very long-winded answer.
No, it's great.
Yeah.
One of the things I wrote down at the end of my notes was he hasn't given up on the factory idea, has he? And it's just so clear that that there's a little bit of the humility of having to start where you have to start and listening to the signals from the market and like not getting too far away from your original vision, but also adapting and surviving and like taking the feedback on the nose and saying, all right, what can we do with this? And how can we continue to build something that's still in our zone of genius that achieves the original mission, but maybe a little bit differently than we began?
Yeah. There's a reason we call Dirac the assembly company. If I was in my home office, you would see behind me an IKEA table with a bunch of Legos on, right? Like I am deeply, for some reason, I don't know why, I'm just deeply obsessed with the concept and the problem of assembly, which in a lot of ways is still very much a problem that we are internally developing some pretty novel stuff to work on. And when you think about it from the perspective of where can we affect change most easily, that would be with software, right? Like we can move faster, we can get into and see a lot more. And because of the reps we're able to build as a software company, so everybody on the team, by the way, I mentioned this a couple of times, it's very, very core to the culture of the team. Everybody on the team comes from a hardware background and has pivoted into software. So basically everybody on the team, the majority of the folks on the team have come from a defense contractor as a mechanical engineer, as a manufacturing engineer, taught themselves how to code, pivoted internally, wrote code for that, for the manufacturing team, and then joined us pretty soon after. And being able to leverage not just the know-how and like the deep understanding of the problem from having seen it yourself, but being able to take the just visceral dissatisfaction with the red tape and the awfulness that it is to work inside of one of these large defense contractors, just from a quality of life perspective. That is a chip on the shoulder of everybody that we want to bring on. And so I don't think that anybody on the team has ever given up the idea or is fully set on being a software company.
Yeah.
I think everybody loves the marriage of the two. And I think if and when we start to make a little bit of a transition there, I think everybody is basically primed and ready to go. So that's pretty exciting for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've heard that as a theme throughout the conversations that you've had as you've kind of begun to talk about the company more publicly since y'all came out of stealth in October 2023. A couple of things here. Number one, in my background over here, or whichever way it is over here.
Oh, and is that a Harry Potter Lego set? That's awesome.
Yeah, it's the Hogwarts Lego set. I have a bunch, but that's the one in the background. I spent part of my sabbatical when I was at my last company building that every night. So we have that in common. But the other big thing that I hear you talking about is that this is a hardware focused company. You're getting there through software right now. But at the end of the day, you are enabling hardware manufacturing through software efficiency and solving a massive problem in that stack that really has been archaic for a very long time. So there's that element. And then there's this other thing that I want to come back to, which is talking about defense manufacturing and just kind of that whole realm of talent and how many people are coming out of that now and coming into the startup world and seeing like, wow, look at how much we can do. Same skills, same people, and completely different mindset and access to resources that allows it to go way faster. So I want to come back to that. And then the last thing is the capital stack for these kinds of businesses. Another guest on the show, Sophie Purdom, she's the co-founder of Climate Tech VC. She's now running a venture capital fund in climate. But a lot of climate is a real world problem. Well, all of it's a real world problem. Some of it can get helped by software. And so much of that problem is reinventing the physical world. And venture capital isn't well positioned for those kinds of problems a lot of the time. You need government funding, you need project-based funding, you need a lot of different types of capital to be accessible to founders. So I want to touch on that too. But I want to come back to the core concept that you shifted to, because what you heard from a lot of those 90 manufacturers that you reached out to, as I understand it, was basically like, no, we're not going to outsource our manufacturing to a brand new company that we don't really trust can actually get it done. But that software you've got there on assembly instructions, that looks awesome. Can we have that? And this is an interesting one of these moments that's like a moment of truth for founders where you say, well, the thing we wanted to do, people don't want. The thing that we were building that would enable the thing we wanted to do, everyone wants. What do we do with that? So talk to me about maybe the conversations that like you and Peter, your co-founder, or you and the team had around shifting from the original idea to, all right, we're going to go into software.
So at the time, it was just me and Peter. We actually did not end up hiring anybody for another, about 7 months. We kept hearing this, right? And I was very stubborn about it. People kept saying, come on, just rip the software out, just give it to us. And friends, like other founders who saw that I was having a tough time raising the factory were saying, Phil, maybe you should think about pivoting. Maybe you should think about, maybe come and join us, et cetera. And I was very stubborn about it. I said, no, building the factory, we're going to do it. And when I was having these conversations with prospective customers, these manufacturing facilities, I kept hearing it over and over again. And there came a specific point in time, like the moment in time where I decided, okay, it's time to do this. It was January 25th, 2023. I remember it very, very well. It was a Wednesday. Yes, this was a Wednesday. I posted on Twitter, like, hey, does anybody have any CAD files? Really want this CAD file or a CAD file to test on, really some software for the factory that we're trying to build. And somebody reached out and he DM'd me on Twitter and he said, no, I'll read this to you. This was the moment. This was Nathan Sidecheck, by the way. NATO working on a company called Longshot Space. Awesome guy, pivotal moment, right? And he said, here's a CAD file. Like, what do you need it for? And I said, working on some software for the factory that we're building. The goal of the software is to basically generate assembly instructions and relationships between parts of the CAD file just from the file itself with minimal hard code. And then NATO said, I want a hard eyes emoji that. That would have been really, really helpful in my last role, which is lead manufacturing engineer over at Astra. We literally spent hundreds of man hours on contract engineers / technical writers to make assembly instructions for technicians to follow. Even getting approximately 90% correct instructions that just needed some tweaks and corrections would have been amazing. I wish you luck in your venture. And I read that and I was like, yeah, like, of course, right? It makes sense. Yeah. You know what? We should rip the software out. So I said, you know what? That's kind of interesting. We'd love to find some time to chat. So that was a Wednesday. And then over the weekend, I talked to Peter, I talked to a couple of friends, and I said, hey guys, we keep hearing this over and over again. I don't know. And this was in the time where in the venture market, interest rates had just started rising. So there's like this huge freeze over. Everybody was like, this is the end of venture forever. So I basically went to Peter and I went to some of my founder friends, and I was like, I went to Augustus, went to Josh Steinman, and I was like, guys, I think we gotta tear the software out. And they were like, thank God. Yeah, finally. So we did. So Peter and I talked about it over the weekend. We were like, all right. I mean, it seems fairly straightforward, but like, let's go get some design partners. Let's go get some actual customers. And so we were basically making this transition in February. And I was like, okay, I got to go hit the road. I basically set up for all those 90 manufacturing facilities. I emailed all of them and I said, hey guys, we're thinking about changing up and this is how I like couched it. I was like, we're thinking about changing up our go-to-market strategy, which like to this day, I barely even know what that phrase actually means, honestly. What is go-to-market? It's like such a nonsensical phrase. So it's like, we're changing up our go-to-market strategy. I would love to chat, hear what you think. This was, so I set up in 2 weeks, I set up 25 calls, went to all of them. And on the first day, I had 5 calls set up. I ended up getting 5 LOIs. And I was like, whoa, okay. Second day, 2 LOIs and a contract. Third day, 2 contracts and an LOI. Fourth day, another 2 LOIs. And I was like, holy shit, okay, maybe there actually is something here. And that was when I went back to Peter and I said, yeah, I think this is actually going to work. So that was the beginning of February. From there, I wanted to actually go visit these facilities, go talk to these guys in person, go see like, what does your assembly line look like? What do work instructions look like for you today? Like, what do we actually do here? Who is our ideal customer? So basically February, March, April, May, we're like really, really heavily customer discovery oriented as we were getting like requirements from like some early design partners. And that is when like Augustus and I started this like great base American tour. He incorporated Rainmaker. He was visiting farms. I was visiting factories. We were sleeping on floors. We were gallivanting. I hit 35 to 36 factories in 6 different cities over the course of roughly 2 months. It was like 6 weeks, roughly. The time's all just kind of a blur.
So I just want to pause you for a second. Do you realize how remarkable it is to have that level of commitment to an idea and to like actually go do that?
It's funny, like not really. It's just kind of what I do for everything. The problem, personal problem, possibly a good thing, possibly a bad thing. I just kind of don't know when to stop, like working on something. There's no off switch in my head for this isn't working, I should quit. Like there's no, people say quitting isn't in my vocabulary, or like it's not possible, it's not in my vocabulary. Quite literally, like there is no psychological mechanism in my brain that says you should stop because this is impossible or you should quit. I don't know if I just like wasn't taught it as a kid or like something never happened, but like physically in my head, like I just, the idea of losing is just not like integrated into the way that I think. Like, of course we're going to win. Like, what are you talking about? It's just going to take a little bit of time, like more effort, more money, like, it's going to be hard or whatever. It's just going to take time, but like, of course we're going to win. Like, why wouldn't we? Right? Like we're good, right? So that mentality, I think, is kind of at the core, or that the psychological framework is just at the core of how I operate. And I try to get other people to believe this as well, or to think about things like from this perspective as well. Like you are a prisoner of your own mind. You can do anything you set your mind to. Literally, like you can just decide I'm going to do a thing, and then you can just go do that thing. Like it's funny. One of my really good friends, Zane Mountcastle, another one of the good fellas, he had this tweet out that said, You don't have to ask any of your permission. You can just open a factory. And it's true. You literally can just go do the thing. Like no one is stopping you but yourself. Your own mentality is the only thing keeping you from achieving the greatness that you think that you deserve and you're entitled to. And I thought about this actually in the context of the word entitlement. I was actually thinking about this a little while ago. Entitlement is not something you are born with. It's something you decide you have. Good entitlement. There's like bad entitlement where like, you're like, oh, because I exist, like I should get all these things. That's the bad entitlement. The good, or like the bad entitlement is like when you think people should just do things for you just because. The good kind of entitlement, which is sort of like this manifest destiny instantiation of entitlement, it's like, no, like we deserve to win because we've decided that we should win and we are willing to execute and win. It's that sort of mentality. I think a lot of the guys here in El Segundo have. I don't know what is the commonality between everybody here that like everybody has that, but failure is just not like a mechanism that is necessarily like taken into account in the way that like the larger American or even global population like really integrates in the way that they act. And I guess to your point, right? So like, do I recognize that like that's not a mentality that's like a different mentality that a lot of people have? I think a lot of what makes America special is that mentality that like there's a higher frequency of that mentality. Like that is sort of like the entrepreneurial spirit that is ingrained into the American tree. It's like life can be great and it should be great and you can make it great through your own action. It's this sort of high agency, definite optimism of I can do the thing because I have decided that I will go do the thing. And there are not these external forces that will stop me. Or even if they try, I will still break through. But like my destiny is within my own hands. I control my own destiny and I can execute on the thing that I want to execute.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And so there's this interesting, there's so much there. And I love hearing just kind of the mentality that you're taking to the work, because when you're starting from scratch, it's what's required. If you're going to make it, it's what's required. It's funny. You're kind of like joshing around about the go-to-market term. I don't know if there's a more literal definition of go-to-market than what you did. You like literally went out to customers and spent time in their reality, learning what they're doing, seeing what problems you're solving, how it's affecting their business, what they're doing instead.
I love the guys that we built for. I love American manufacturers. I love Americans. I love people. I love spending time with people. I love specifically spending time with the guys that we're building for. I think, unfortunately, they are heavily, heavily neglected. I think a lot of folks come out like for the past like 10, 15 years, and you see this in the way that they, like some of the older heads that I would like sell to, you see this in the way that they would like knee-jerk react on like the first 5, 10 minutes of a call. For the past like 10, 15 years, you've had like kids come out of Stanford say, hey, I'm going to go build like Stripe for manufacturing or something. They end up basically go like doing like AI for X or whatever. And then they go visit some manufacturing facility. They talk to a guy who's been there for like 35 years, blue collar dude who's just like putting food on the table for his family, just a good, like honest, hardworking American. And they'll go to his boss, the C-suite, and they'll be like, oh, hey, we've got all this fancy stuff. And it basically takes like their manual pen and paper process. And whoa, now it like syncs with the cloud. Isn't that cool? It like never actually changes the quality of life for the guy actually doing the work. It's always just like they convince C-suite, and C-suite imposes down upon them, right? This software solution. The guys on the floor play around with it for like a couple weeks or like a month. And then they're like, oh, this is dog shit. It collects dust on the shelf for the rest of the time. And it is the reality for most software solutions that are sold into manufacturing, because engineers love to build software for other engineers. Nobody likes to build software for technicians and manufacturing folks that like actually improves the quality of life. And you see that instantiated in the difference between, very much at its core, like the problem that we're solving. So for the past 50 years, CAD software has gotten all the upgrades. I'll wind this back a little bit, and I'll tell a little bit of the story about the problem and the history of the problem that we're solving.
Can I see if I can tell it based on what I've heard you say? And then I want to see if you want to correct me on it. Would that be cool?
That would be awesome. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Let's see if I understand. So I worked at a climate tech company for a 6-month period, and I got to kind of see the very real day-to-day of the problem that exists here. And I had to go learn about it more generally to see, okay, from a business perspective, how do we solve for this? So CAD software is something akin to like Photoshop or Figma in the digital world. It's a place where you design hardware, and there's layers and layers and layers of the file for every piece that's going to go inside that piece of hardware. And it's basically a design software for the real world. You're designing something, a part, an engine, a rotor, whatever, and getting a digital representation of that. But the thing that's different about manufacturing in the real world than designing online is you don't just ship it to code and it appears on the web. It actually has to like physical materials have to be turned into the thing that exists in the design software. And there are real human beings and or robots that have to construct the thing on a factory floor into the object that is represented by the digital file. Well, in the past, to get from this 3-dimensional kind of like complex design software to the manufacturing floor, you had human beings going in, taking screenshots, making slide decks, making like SOP style docs to say, first you take this part and you put it with this part and use this grease here and use this amount of torque here and whatever. So it's all of the very detailed. I think of it like, to go back to the Lego thing, it's almost like breaking it down into Lego instructions for assembly. And it's a very manual process. And there's this lag between a mechanical engineer designing something in CAD software to a manufacturing engineer trying to actually put it together. And if that's 2 years, and that's how long it takes you to come back and say, a reasonable human's hand doesn't fit in the hole where you want me to screw a bolt in, it's like, well, shit, we got to go fix that. And now you're all the way back to the beginning. And so what you're doing, what the software does is it compresses that timeline from like weeks, months to create the assembly instructions to minutes, where it's 80% of the way there. And now you can add in this layer of like instruction and built up wisdom over time, collected wisdom from the people on the floor to say, all right, here's the instructions, go test it out. Let us know if something's screwed up, we'll fix it. And so your cycles get a lot faster, which means you can produce things like engines, drones, rotors, whatever, electrolyzers, much, much faster than if you were doing it the old way. Is that basically it?
That was incredible. You're looking for a sales job here? Because we're hiring. That was honestly probably the best run through of the pitch that I've heard anybody besides me give. So that was actually really, really, really spot on. Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, we're taking that process, we're automating most of the grunt work of it, and yeah, that's literally couldn't have said it better myself. I'm actually for it. Because I've had a lot of people say, hey, so it's like IKEA, but like 3D and automated, right? And I'm like, yeah, that's basically it. But like, yes, you pretty much nail it there.
Sweet. So here's my follow-on question to this, because it's like if you spend all your time trying to get people to get it, that's one thing. But it's all the downstream impacts of this that are really fascinating to me. That's where I get pumped, because there are so many problems in manufacturing. And you can talk about it from like an onshoring, offshoring perspective. But I think about it even in terms of we basically need to reinvent the entire physical world that we've created over the past 100 years for a modern, sustainable, long-term society that has prospects for growth over an infinite amount of time. And you can think about that in terms of like going to the stars. We can talk about the foundation story here in a bit, or you can talk about it in terms of, for example, electrolyzers or small nuclear reactors or whatever the technology of the future is that we need to build. Getting the cycle time down is critical to actually deploying the technology and seeing if it works. So just talk to me about some of the different industries that you're seeing this apply to and some of the downstream effects that you think it'll have in those industries that benefit everyone that's going to listen to this.
Right on. So a lot of the folks that we see definitely heavily benefiting from this would be aerospace and defense, automotive. There is this enormous tier 1 through 3 supplier base underneath those OEMs that they basically make the same sub-assemblies and sell them to different OEMs and different industry verticals.
So so most people listening won't know what an OEM is. Can you just define that real quick?
Yes. OEM stands for original equipment manufacturer. Those guys do the final assembly and integration, typically, of some complex system. Those are the guys who the logos of. So
Toyota.
Exactly. Like an automotive OEM is somebody who puts the logo on the front of the car. Actually, let me explain what tier 1 means in the context of OEMs. And I'll also pair that with how that actually relates to the CAD file and the structure of the CAD file. Kind of an interesting parallel. So let's talk about, for example, Boeing, right? Everybody knows Boeing. They make planes. They make really big planes, really cool planes. They've been falling out of the sky recently. Basically, if we were to work with Boeing as an example, Boeing has a CAD file, a 3D model of an assembly of the whole plane. But the plane is not just, you don't start from scratch and manufacture every bolt in that plane at Boeing. Boeing buys parts from a lot of different places. And so if you look at the structure of a CAD file for that plane, you will see that it is actually an assembly of sub-assemblies, of sub-assemblies, of sub-assemblies, of sub-assemblies. So you have this crazy nested hierarchy of assemblies with this Russian nesting doll of assemblies. And so the engine that goes on a Boeing aircraft, Boeing does not make that themselves. They buy it as one solid engine. They buy it as they buy it from Rolls-Royce, right? So they buy a jet engine from Rolls-Royce and they slap it on, right? They slap it under the wing. In that case, that makes Rolls-Royce the tier 1 supplier of Boeing. So Boeing does the final assembly and integration of their plane that then is sold to an airline or however they operate in that way. And so Rolls-Royce sells them an engine, and then the person who sells let's say a sub-assembly to Rolls-Royce that goes in that engine, that's a tier 2 supplier. And then somebody who sells a subcomponent to that guy, that's a tier 3, and so on. And so there is this enormous, when we talk about SMBs or mid-market manufacturers, those are the enormous supplier base or manufacturing industrial base within the US that makes up that tier 1 through 3 supply chain. And those guys have hundreds of thousands of SKUs. For example, we found that specifically a lot of companies that really love to work with us are valve and pump manufacturers. So you think valves, right? Valves are everywhere. We're talking to this one company that is a subsidiary of a larger parent company. The subsidiary has, we're just talking about something like 80,000 to 100,000 different types of valve. And then they're owned by a parent company that has 50 different subsidiaries that are also valve and pump manufacturers. And that's just one parent company. So the number of different systems that you can buy that are kind of similar is literally true. When you look at the mid-market manufacturer or the SMB base within the United States, I think the number, I could be totally wrong about this. I think it's 40% of US GDP is SMBs. The majority of that is a mid-market manufacturer, is the mid-market manufacturers. So those guys benefit a lot from what we're building because this helps them in their day-to-day. It helps them get to market faster. It helps them do a lot more with a lot less. Something that people ask me about the software, they ask me explicitly, what's the value prop, right? What's the value prop of the software? What do people get out of this? And the first thing they ask is, oh, so it's the typical way that people think about how like manufacturers operate. Oh, so if this lets you draft work instructions 10 times faster, that means that, oh, I have 10 manufacturing engineers, I can fire 9 of them, and one guy can now do the work of 10. They ask, oh, is that right? You can allow them to cut costs by firing 9 out of 10 people? I'm like, no. You're actually getting cause and effect completely reversed. In fact, the real value prop is now that you can do the work of 10 people with one person, when your 9 manufacturing folks end up retiring, and you just have one of those 10 guys left, now you don't have to shut down your manufacturing facility or close down an entire product line just because basically everybody on your team ended up retiring.
Okay, so I want to pause here real quick because this is a massive problem that I think many people who just go through life buying finished products, whatever they might be, whether it's at Home Depot or whether it's at an automobile dealer, don't understand the situation within our manufacturing base in America, especially, where you've got basically an aging population of people who have been running these factories for a long time. They have all of this collective wisdom about how these things work. And it's little things like, don't forget to grease that thing before you put it together because it'll break the moment you put it into production if you don't, or whatever. It goes to all layers of complexity. And these people are getting older because we've offshored so much of manufacturing in this country. There's just not as much need for the kinds of wisdom that we have and the kinds of built up knowledge. So as people retire, there's not a new base of people coming in to replace them. And as they retire, you lose all this knowledge. And so this is a big thing that you talk about when you pitch what the software does is it's a store of this information, because it's not just that you're automating the output and saying, do it in this order. It's that then the manufacturing engineers can come in and say, and here's all the shit that you wouldn't know if you were just looking at the photos. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. So we very, when we talk about the software, we very much advertise it as it's not a fully automated solution. It's pretty automated. It's mostly automated. It's very, very much an 80-20 tool. So we automate 80% of the grunt work. We take your CAD file in, basically run a physics simulation that figures out what to do all the assembly, and they'll automatically generate all the visuals for you. But the remaining 10-20% that we don't automate, that is the sort of like rule of thumb, tribal knowledge, know-how type of information you can't get from a CAD file. You know, this type of stuff like grease this, Loctite that, toward this bolt, this spec that lives inside the heads of the guys on the floor who have been on the team for the past 35 years. And so we basically end up becoming this double-edged sword of us automating like most of the grunt work, but also becoming this like data collection platform for your manufacturing team that basically collects all this real-world manufacturability information, tribal knowledge that you can disseminate across your manufacturing engineering team. So you can take the knowledge from the guy who's been on the team for 35 years and help that, or use that to help educate somebody who's just coming on the team at the age of like 22. And then as those folks end up retiring, you end up basically embedding that tribal knowledge within the context of both your work instructions and then eventually the direction that we'll end up building the product line out back into the mechanical design process, contextualized in the context of your mechanical design. So it's very much looking at driving value from this bottoms up manufacturability perspective rather than the way that all engineering software is built, which is sort of this top-down engineering perspective of like the platonic ideal of these solids and like how all these shapes are just like, you know, brushing up against each other without any real context for the real world.
Yeah. It's like economic theory versus reality. It's like the idea of a rational actor with total transparency versus like the irrational things that people do every day.
Exactly.
There's this, I don't know if you ever heard of this project I don't know if you've ever heard of this project called StoryCorps from NPR, but it was this project they put together that was on a similar premise that I'm going to bring it back to here. So StoryCorps is essentially created to try and capture the collected wisdom and stories of aging Americans. And the idea was that as you get people who age, they are paid less and less attention to. Like old people don't get invited on podcasts as often as young people, for example. And so we lose their stories, we lose their wisdom, we lose what they know. So StoryCorps was designed to both have a funded operation where NPR was going out and interviewing older Americans to capture their stories and wisdom. But then they also produced a kit for if you wanted to do that with for example, family members. You could go interview your grandfather, your great grandmother, or whoever that might be aging so that their history and like legend could be preserved for the family in their own words. I think that's super awesome. There's a version of this going on here where we need this knowledge in the manufacturing base. It's much more practical, tactical, and less emotional, but it's a massive challenge. If you lose all of that knowledge and you have no way to get it back, building from scratch is way harder than capturing it before it's gone.
I mean, you're totally right. I think we have the ability to be that for the American industrial supply chain. It's really scary that we have this sort of transitions into like a sort of like a separate subject. Just talking about European adversaries. It is scary and unfortunate that we basically spent 30 years, like since the fall of the Soviet Union, building up and financing the building up of a European adversary and their infrastructure. And effectively, we haven't really, it's not that we outsourced, right? It's not that we offshored that travel knowledge, but we kind of did, right? We would send American manufacturers overseas. We would have them set up manufacturing facilities, have them train out local populations. And then from there, we were like, all right, have fun, catch you later. And then they were able to build up that travel knowledge, like handoff system, right? They were able to like build up institutions and mechanisms for retaining that information within those facilities overseas. And now we have basically, as our infrastructure ends up becoming like hollowed out, there is an entrenched system overseas that knows how to build things, and they have mechanisms for protecting against the loss of that information. So we have like, we basically kneecap ourselves. Like, it's funny in like a sort of like an ironic way. And yeah, it's funny. We're like, things were getting too easy for America. We were winning too hard. We were killing it too much. We actually decided to like make our own worst nightmare. Now we basically were like, man, what can we now do now that we have like a new enemy, right? It's like, we basically thought that like the red dragon had been slain, right? We thought that the good had prevailed. So we basically said, let's set up a new enemy for ourselves. Perhaps that actually is useful, right?
The implications of this are fascinating, right? Because from the place we are operating from in a world of peace and mutually assured destruction backed by nuclear weapons, there's a lot of sense making that you can do around building a global society because it's in everyone's best interest. And there's a game theory element to it that comes into play as that transition happens, where there's new points of leverage in the relationship that change the dynamics at play in the relationships between nations and the relationships between regions, between power centers. And so you have all these complex dynamics that come into play around, if you don't have the ability to make anything, in what new ways are you reliant on another entity? And what does that mean for how you have to treat the relationship? You know, if you're codependent on another human being, you treat their emotions like they're your emotions, like at the individual level. And the version of that happens internationally, where if you are completely dependent on another nation, you have to treat them differently than if you have an arm's length relationship where like you want inherent good for humanity. And in that sense, you want good for them, but you're not reliant on them, whoever the entity is. You know, in this case, I think everyone knows, like we're talking about one country, essentially. There are some others as well. But that's dangerous. And you could look at oil and gas in this way as well. Oil supply was this for a very long time. When resources are constrained, people fight, essentially. And so there's just this complex dynamic at play. I personally don't know that the answer is, therefore, we should only manufacture everything we ever consume. I think the danger, from my point of view, is if we have no ability to manufacture the things that we consume, then we're in trouble. And there's a wide range of opinions on this. I don't think there's a right answer. I think it's just like you come at it from different angles. But I certainly think preserving the ability to manufacture is critical. So I'm just curious how you think about that.
I think we should be as self-reliant as possible. Personally, we need to start mining domestically. Environmentalists have things very backwards in a lot of places. A lot of environmentalists have these just grossly over-protectionist policies that they put in place that are actually in a lot of ways regressive. I hear about and I learned about this through various mechanisms growing up, but now having actually seen it firsthand just through Augustus doing his thing, it is crazy how many people are economically incentivized to make sure that we do not actually improve American self-reliance, which to me is baffling. But like it's more than just the American self-reliance; it's the environmental implications of what that means. Like the US, you can engineer your way out of environmental situations. People don't want nuclear, right? People who don't want nuclear are unsafe. People who are against building new technologies for geoengineering, they're fearful of technology that they don't understand, which is just this inherently Ludditic way of thinking, which stops us from building new technologies that do not have disastrous implications. It's like you end up putting in policies that, from the environmental perspective, stop you from doing cloud seeding or stop you from doing any sorts of interesting research, which by doing that prevents people from developing novel technologies that can do that thing safer in a way that is not economically or environmentally negatively impactful, but instead positive. I don't know the age demographic of this population, but I would not be surprised if it is not even the oldest generation. I wouldn't be surprised if it is sort of this millennial generation of folks who are sort of they grew up in the shadow of the victory, or maybe it might be a little bit more like Gen X, right? It's like folks who grew up in the shadow of global American victory. They grew up in the 90s and they saw us take down the Soviet Union. They're like, yeah, freedom won. It's over. We never have to fight war again. And so they're also you see these same people are very anti-defense. They're like, oh no, it's the same people who did who were at Google who walked out during the Maven thing. It's the same people who are not people who have falsely undergone a transition higher in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's the strata of defense, right? The strata of having a country that is not at war internally on its own land, that people can focus on doing more productive things. And there's a strata of people in our country that are just so totally unaware that you actually have to make sure that your country is safe in order to do the things that they are super involved in.
I think that is true. I think that there's a certain amount of inherent defensibility that we've had for a very long time through power that we take for granted. Your generation, my generation, the one before me. So I think you're probably Gen Z. I'm Gen whatever millennial is, and are you on the border?
I'm the oldest of Gen Z, more millennial-ish. Okay. I feel more like millennial. I feel like a boomer actually internally, I actually feel more like somebody that grew up in the 60s. But
okay,
right before
it makes sense.
Great things.
The cycles are interesting, but going all the way back to Gen X and kind of down, right? XYZ, we've just lived in a different world than everyone that came before us. We have had wars, but they were always distant. They were always away from us. 9/11 was the closest thing we had to something that really impacted us deeply here on our territory. And there are many other things that obviously we struggle with as a country, but that does create a different kind of mentality. It's a certain amount of being able to take for granted a level of safety that has not been true for most of history, because the history of humanity is a history of wars in many cases. And so if we take that as true, yes, I think it's true that there are downstream implications of how we prioritize what we talk about. I see this as not necessarily that there are Luddites or that people are stupid for not wanting nuclear. I had Packy McCormick on the show, for example. We talked a lot about nuclear. And if you just think about the very visceral, emotional level reaction to knowing about something like Chernobyl, it's scary. The idea of being irradiated to death is scary. That idea is. But if you look at the data on the safety of nuclear, it is by far the safest energy source on the planet by deaths per unit of energy produced. And that is the fact, right? And so we're dealing with these dual, it's like the thinking fast and slow type thing. It's type 1 and type 2 thinking of the emotional nervous system reaction versus the logical brain-centered reaction. And I think as technologists, as people trying to build the future, we have a responsibility to make it accessible to people. It's part of why I want to talk to people like you is let's make this accessible. Let's break it down. Let's invite people in to see there's another way we can build, right?
Yeah. I think there are, in nuclear specifically, I think a lot of the 1970s anti-nuclear regulation came out of, you can trace everything back to economic interests. I think it came out of certain parties that are not poised to make money on nuclear, that are poised to make money on alternative sources of energy production. I think they very much lobby for that, and they end up benefiting from anti-nuclear regulation. So it's very much like a follow the money question. And I think when you start to ask those kinds of questions, that's where you start to get in trouble in some places. But that's where I think fear is a tactic that people use to meet economic ends. And I think nuclear is exactly the story of that. And I think we're coming back. We have never been so back. We are extremely back, as the fellows say. I wouldn't say that I misspoke earlier. I do not think that people who are anti-nuclear are crazy. I think they are brainwashed. I think they have been fear-mongered into having a certain perspective on something that is remedied by just looking at actual facts and information rather than having your emotions influenced by somebody with really good advertising and really good marketing.
So I would say, my framework on this is empathy, education, and exposure. Empathy for understanding where people are coming from at the emotional level, being with them and what's going on. Education on fact-based information and everything that we know. And then exposure, just like exposure therapy works for things like spiders and snakes, helping people see the things that work on the ground in the real world. And I think that's the methodology that we can use to really bring people on board and say, let's go together.
Yeah. We need elementary school field trips to nuclear power plants. Unironically, that's the thing, right? You take kids to a nature preserve, you let them see animals and stuff. You let them play with frogs at, in ponds and lakes. Yeah, you should give some kids some hard hats and bring them to a nuclear power plant.
Same thing with factories.
Exactly. It's the same thing. You during the same time, this also came with the financialization of the West, right? You ended up having way more glorification of these finance heavy jobs in the 90s, very centered on Wall Street, right? It became very, very the hot thing was to be a yuppie, to be in investment banking, to be a consultant. And it was very frowned upon to not go to college, to go work in a factory. And we did our infrastructure disservice culturally by taking the once great American manufacturing spirit and degrading manufacturers culturally to second class citizens. So by and large, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make it awesome and sexy again to build with your hands. We're trying to convince people, we're trying to get people to visit factories, to get in, to do good work, to build something meaningful. Because the only way we win is if people start being excited to work with their hands again. And there's literally no way around. And I'm really excited to help, right? I'm super excited to be playing my little role in trying to get people more excited about building hard shit again. But yeah, there's no other way to do that than to take what we're doing and amplify it, get more people in El Segundo, get more people working on hard tech startups. Although ironically, we're one of the very few ones that are a software company, but we call ourselves the anti-software company for that reason. But actually to this point, one of our guys, Jared worked at General Dynamics Electric Boat for 7 years. He was a manufacturing engineer at a company prior called Hubble Power Systems. So they made transformers down in Georgia. And then he was a senior nuclear engineer over at General Dynamics Electric Boat. So he manned a Virginia-class sub, worked on pumps and valves, and knows the ins and outs of a Virginia-class sub. And so everybody on the team very much benefits from being brought up in that culture of working with your hands, understanding that these things actually matter. And what we want to get people more excited about, just from a culture perspective, is getting more people excited about building these hard things, solving hard problems, working on physical things.
Yeah, I think it's critical and we need it. And it's a really hard problem to figure out how to get people interested in it again. I'm going to use that as an opportunity to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to talk about some of your personal journey, about how you got here, some of the inspirations growing up for the kind of career that you're building now. I want to talk about some of the ideas that you have as you grow from founder getting started into CEO, leading a team. And then as always, we'll have the 3 closing questions I always use. So that's what people can look forward to when we come back. Hey, it's Barrett. You've reached about the midpoint of this conversation. And while we take a little break for station identification, as they say, I want to tell you about 2 things. First of all, I write a newsletter every Saturday for founders and creators who are leading teams and companies to make an impact through your work. It has 3 sections in it. The first one is a mini essay from me based on my executive coaching work with founders and creators about how to lead well. It has 3 long-form essays or links from around the web that will help spark new thoughts to help you lead better. And it has 1 quote from a meaningful book that I often find myself recommending to friends and clients. All the feedback I've gotten so far is that it hits exactly on the kinds of issues that founders, CEOs, and creators are facing every day in their work. So if that sounds appealing to you, make sure to go to my website at barrettbrooks.com and you can subscribe right at the top of the homepage. That's BARRETTBROOKS.com. The second thing I want to tell you about is that my day job, I actually do have a day job, I'm not just a podcaster yet, is as an executive coach, as I just mentioned. I work with founders of Series A startups and later, and with creators who are doing at least $1 million as a solo founder and are now thinking about growing a team. The uniting commonality between the founders and the creators I work with is that you've reached a point in your business where you know you're going to make it. Actually, you're doing quite well. And now the question is, how much do you want to scale? And what are the leadership challenges that you're going to face along the way? This work is based on both my training as a coach and in my work as an operator and growing my old company ConvertKit from $3 to $30 million in annual revenue. If you're a founder or creator who might benefit from coaching, or if you know someone who's looking for a coach, I'd love for you to check out my site and my coaching page at barrettbrooks.com/coaching. You can learn everything about how I work as a coach and also fill out a form to have an exploratory conversation if that sounds interesting to you. All right, that's all I got for you right now. There's no sponsors for the show at the moment, so consider me your sponsor. Let's get back to the conversation for the second half. All right, Phil, welcome back for the second half here. I want to take a look back at, we had this really beautiful exploration of manufacturing, the thesis of the company, like the journey to transition from the factory that you were originally building to Dirac as a company. I will just add a little note on the name of the company that Dirac is the name of a scientist who discovered what would become known as positrons and won the Nobel Prize for it. And it was a really fun Wikipedia page to go read. So for anyone interested in nerdy scientific history, that's where the name came from, and you should look it up. I want to come back to one of the stories you tell and some of the inspirations for your journey, Dirac being one of them. But another is Tony Stark. You talk about kind of like growing up, superheroes, comics, Tony Stark being from Long Island and you're from Long Island, and just so many of these elements of his story, and then kind of like projecting what you saw in Tony Stark onto Elon Musk and his journey and how he's kind of gone about post PayPal using that wealth to build businesses that are doing important things in the world. And so I kind of take this like trio of people, right? There's Dirac, the scientist, there's Elon Musk, the modern day entrepreneur, there's Tony Stark, the comic superhero, and they all kind of represent, I kind of think of these interviews as like a way of deconstructing the influences on my guests. And I look at these 3 people as some of the influences on you. And I just wonder how you got exposed to all these different types of things so early in life. I mean, you're still like relatively early in your career. You got started as an entrepreneur early. You seem to know you wanted to be an engineer early. And I'm just curious, like how that came to be. How did you get exposed to so much of the science and engineering type stuff early?
It's a good question. I always liked building things. Very, very young age, like 2, 3 years old, I was always like building with blocks. I loved Legos growing up, still do, obviously. I was always fascinated by spaceships. Like I wanted to be, growing up as like a kid, I wanted to be like a spaceship designer. I wanted to be like an explorer, an adventurer. Like my dream was to be a spaceship designer and then go explore the galaxy in my own spaceship. That was like, as a little kid, that was like the dream. There were so many variants of like what I was going to be when I grew up. It was like, originally it was like inventor. Like I wanted to just like create crazy inventions. Like I wanted to like build things. Like at one point it was like architect, and at another point it was like astronaut / spaceship designer, right? There were so many variants of it. And I think it all came down to when I was a kid, I'm very, very fortunate. My parents just kind of let me they didn't like put pressure on me to like pursue a career path. I just kind of like naturally gravitated towards like building things. I loved I actually grew up playing video games a lot. I loved computers, built my own computer when I was 12 or 13 with some of my friends. And I was always just really fascinated by how things fit together, how systems worked. I grew up watching this show called How It's Made. Oh my god! And actually, a huge influence on me. Mythbusters, the Discovery Channel show. That was crazy. I would binge Mythbusters episodes. I was just so fascinated by how you can have this like workshop, with your buddies, and you just build crazy things, and like nobody would stop you. That was actually untapped memory. That's huge. I was obsessed with Mythbusters. If I ever meet Adam Savage, that'd be crazy. Crazy. So that, I think, just a combination of things in my childhood of being really into video games, being really into the sort of notion of having these expansive worlds. As like a 10-year-old, really funny actually. I played Roblox a lot. I was an early Roblox player. So like, to me, it's hilarious. It's hilarious that Roblox is turning into like this, like a venture-backed massive company, right? It's a public company. Just so funny to me because like I would play it as a kid. When did I make my first account? It was like 2007. I was playing Roblox, and there was this. You had clans, and you had like this in-game economy. You had like limited items over at a certain point in time, where they developed this like in-game like bartering economy and this like online forum called Let's Make a Deal. They don't have any of this anymore, unfortunately. I checked. It's really sad, honestly. But I guarantee you, if you find people who were like in that early days, like those people are probably building companies right now. There's this whole like barter economy. And I, from a young age, just like in that sort of like world, I didn't really have like a ton of friends. I was just like playing video games all the time. And in that sort of like Roblox atmosphere, I think one was immersed in this like reality of like, you have this open world, you can just like build things. I actually did have a few friends that I did play video games with some friends from school for like, that was like the thing. I didn't play sports. In high school, I picked up competitive powerlifting and swimming on the swim team, but like definitely like elementary school, like middle school, it was video games. We played Minecraft together. We like early Minecraft, like Alpha, like the earliest of days. I played Roblox, and not with anybody like that I went to school with or anything, but I basically just from a young age was immersed in this like unlimited reality. Right, there was this world that you can immerse yourself in that was different from anything that you can experience in the real world. You had this balanced environment that you can just create your own reality with it. You can create a world. You can place this block over there. You can build this structure, and it was like literally all at your fingertips. All you had to do was like X. They're like, there weren't any physical laws. There wasn't anybody telling you can't. You could just do. And I think that probably had like a pretty big impact on the way that I just like framed the world. Probably like subconsciously. I don't think I've actually ever really explored this too much. This might be the first time I'm like really diving into that from like a psychological perspective. But like, probably did have a pretty big effect on me. That like I don't have to be a certain age to go participate in the economy. I can go barter with these guys on like trading like this hat for that hat and that whole thing. And just being exposed to that at a very early age, I think for me is very impactful. That like there's nothing that says that you can't do the thing. You can build the team. You can go to this in-game clan system. I was a part of this clan, and like we went to war. It was all just like 10, 11-year-olds, literally like built like different games. And there was politics, there were like elections as like 10 and 11-year-olds, which is crazy. I don't even know if Roblox, they probably did know how sophisticated it was, but yeah, like you like literally we went to war. We would like we made guns in the game, and it was a crazy time. It's a crazy time.
Well, when I hear you talk about this, I've got these parallel tracks running in my mind of the beginning of our conversation and this, and you talking about this kind of like boundless energy. This, I think you put it as like, we're going to win. It's just a matter of finding the way to win. You know, I always talk about this in terms of staying in the game long enough to win, but this kind of like boundless possibility in front of you are the talk tracks for both these stories. It's the like origin story and how you were shaped, the way that your mind reacted to these worlds, whether it was comics or video games or real life examples of it. And for example, Elon, and the parallels that now has to the way that you approach your work and how you view the future, and that you are an agent driving change, not being subject to it. And even when you are subject to it, that you can react and adapt to it. I mean, it's kind of beautiful, man. It's like pretty awesome actually to hear the origins.
It is. It's funny to talk about it, but yeah, I think everybody has agency and autonomy. I think everybody can be a player in the game of reality if they so choose. Like there's nothing aside from, and I was talking about this earlier. You can just decide to be player one.
Yeah,
like you
can Ready
join
Player One.
Yeah,
one of my favorite books of all time.
I've never read it. I have it on my shelf. I actually have never read it.
It was one of the first books I picked up. So I read the Foundation series too, which we can talk about some if we want. But I love sci-fi and fantasy because it has this ability to like sweep you away to a world where maybe sometimes it's reflective of like the physics of reality here, but sometimes it's not. You just get to remove all the boundaries, right? And that's what's cool about video games too, is it's not always subject to the laws of gravity and physics and everything that we are subject to. But what's interesting to me about how we use these stories as inspiration for the real world is you reacted by going and studying the things that help you understand the like fundamental underlayer, the engineering aspects of how the world works and what's true as a base layer for everything that you now do. And then even in studying robotics, it's like, how do we then apply that to robotics in the world as well? Which then leads to the factory idea. And like all of these layers, you can start to peel back and see how they build on each other. Not that you can necessarily do it going forwards, but like I have 2 young boys. I think about that for my kids. What do I want to expose them to? What are the things that I want to give them the opportunity to be interested in? Not push them to, but just expose them to so they can find their own interests. I'm curious though about why you picked engineering and robotics as the things that you really wanted to pursue in depth early on.
I've thought about it. I've tried to pin it on something, right? It'd be nice if there was like a coherent story about like, I had this moment. I don't know if there was. I think I've just always wanted to build stuff. I think the word engineer was not made clear to me as like the name for the thing I wanted to be until like probably high school, like middle of high school, beginning/middle of high school. But I just always gravitated towards like making stuff. I went to summer camp and I liked going on hikes because I would like collect sticks. Like I had this awesome walking stick, man. And that was awesome. Specifically the walking stick, the best part of it. I would like just build like structures with these sticks out in the woods. You know, that was like, I don't know, it was just cool. It's just like a thing I did. I don't know if I ever really, it's sort of like this just innate kind of like this biological mechanism to just like make a thing. Like a beaver, like it's the best analogy I can come up with is like, why does a beaver build a dam? It's like, dog, I don't know. He just does it. You know, it's just kind of like something in the DNA of a beaver. It's just like, it's dam building time, fellas. Like let's go dam it up.
Part of why I ask is I think a lot about my childhood in this way. Like I get to do all these interviews. And so then I reflect on myself as well. And one of the things I've thought a ton about is there's this facility in a science center in Atlanta where I grew up called Fernbank. And they would have these summer camps, nerdiest summer camp you could go to. They had like an aerospace one where you do flight simulators and build paper airplanes and look at different aerodynamics and stuff like that. There was like a bridge week where we built different bridge structures from balsam wood and saw how structurally sound they were. It was, there was like a robotics week. And I think back, I loved that stuff. It was like the thing I loved more than anything. Lego, same kind of thing, just building things in the real world. And there are some like natural abilities or talents that this maps to in some good assessments out there in the world. It's called spatial relations, both theory and visualization. So there's like ways to measure your propensity for this stuff. And I'm very high in both of those things. And so it's like, I was clearly wired for it. I enjoyed it. But what I didn't have as I look back, I didn't have anyone that was an example for me. I didn't know any engineers. I didn't see anyone in my life who was building stuff. People that I knew were business people, entrepreneurs, things like that. My mom was an entrepreneur. And so I ended up studying accounting and finance in school, both of which I hated. And so I think a lot about like, where's that turning point where you get just enough exposure that you realize, oh, I can go do that in the real world. And so like, it's interesting to me when you say you found out an engineer was the term early in high school. Who was the role model or who was the person helping you expose you to that?
So I have a twin brother. He also studied finance and economics in school. So he like growing up, we were both into like a lot of this stuff. It was like I was the engineer, he was the scientist. So he was much more interested in like medicine and chemistry. I liked things that were hard, like things that were soft. Like, you know, I liked like metal. And he ended up going to like finance and accounting because like I think in high school he realized he really had a deep interest in like markets and like these types of things. To be honest, I have no idea how he got into it either. Like it just sort of like we just one day like we just decided to like go these separate routes. And I think that happened probably in maybe it was there's a lot of like little things that add up over time. So like as we were mentioning, as you were talking, I started to remember like some things from my early childhood, like the movie Treasure Planet, right? Like that was Disney movie, one of the greatest movies of all time, like super awesome. Like I love the idea of being a space pirate. If you look at on our company like a hiring page, I mentioned this show called One Piece, one of the greatest stories ever told, 1,000-episode anime. I am fully caught up with it, and it's about this crew of pirates. Where a whole other conversation to have, but like I love One Piece. It's one of the greatest stories ever, and it tells a story of how there's a way to get to where you want to go always, and all you have to do is make as many friends as possible, and that will help you get to wherever you want to go. I love making friends. I'm an amalgamation of everybody who's ever taken a bet on me. And I owe it to them to win. And that's a mentality that I carry forward. And I think about the aspect of being a pirate, not in like the actual historical pirate sense of like raping and pillaging. Like that's a little more like the romantic sense of the pirate of like being out in the open sea and adventuring, having like boundless opportunity in front of you, just this open sea of you can go anywhere with whoever you choose, and doing that in space seems sick. So that's the space pirate perspective, and so it's like that coupled with just looking at complex systems and being like, I wonder how they like made that thing. Like you look at like a train. I take the train into work in New York, and I look at the train, I look at the tracks, and my mind just wanders to like. I just imagine like how do they form the metal for the rails? I wonder who like purchased that light on that rail car that like illuminates. Like I wonder how they made. I just think about that stuff. I don't know why. Yeah. Like there's nothing that like. Curiosity. I guess if that's the right word for it. I just like my whole life always just the way that I've been is like I daydream. Like I just get lost in thought thinking about. I look at a thing. I'm in El Segundo right now, right? Right outside my window is the power plant. Not power plant, it's the refinery. And if you have like an image of this, it is the craziest contraption, like on the street, looking at this refinery, the craziest like mechanism of like pipes and tubes and valves and just like crazy shit. And like, I look at that and I'm like, oh my God, I wonder how they made that thing. That's crazy. Yeah.
And so why does it look like that? Like who designed all that stuff to make it look like that? Right. Exactly. Yeah. We'll include a photo in the show notes.
I daydreamed to the conversation, like almost like a flashback for a moment in time that I wasn't there for of like the dialogue between two different guys talking about a subsection of the refinery and like how to structure it and like why. So like, why does that thing fit together like that? And like that is the most core element of Dirac that is my spirit, my soul. Is like why do it do that thing? Why does it look like that? Why does it fit together like that? So like for me, like Dirac, like our company is an encapsulation of my soul in that respect. It is the understanding. It is the realization of the question of why does that thing fit together like that? Why does that thing look like that? And that is the question I've been asking all my life, always, wherever I am, is like, why? And so I think Dirac is my ability to answer why.
It's you making the Lego instructions for the real world. I love that.
Exactly.
As an idea. This brings me to a thing that I had in my notes that I just find is I've been so drawn to it out of curiosity. I get really fascinated by people and relationships and the emotional journey of all of these things. These things being building companies, building careers, making work, putting yourself out there, taking 300 meetings with investors, all of these things. And you're clearly bolstered by a really powerful and like self-reinforcing group of friends, founders, people building courageous things. You talk about Augustus Dorico, who's the founder of Rainmaker, which is a company working on cloud seeding. You talked about Brett earlier, who is building a robotics company. You talk about a lot of these folks, right, that are working to transform the world in their own way. And you mentioned it earlier about this kind of community of people that's come together and how it's interesting that you're all kind of driven in the same way. What I was going to offer in return to that is it feels almost like you're fueling each other. That maybe you might have each had a little bit of that inclination, but Augustus seeing you go visit 90 manufacturers and you seeing him testify to the Tennessee legislature and all of these little bits build on each other. They're a compounding effect in and of themselves by being surrounded by this peer group from my seat. And so I just wonder how that lands with you, if you feel like there's this interrelationship there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're nothing without the people we surround ourselves with. I love all my friends. I think they are the best. Very, very fortunate to have them as friends and very, very fortunate to have them as a positive influence on me. The greatest decision you have to make is who do you want to surround yourself with? And you can just choose to surround yourself with the best people you possibly can. And I think that's what I've been fortunate enough to do. I've been fortunate enough to be able to surround myself with guys like Augustus, guys like Isaiah Taylor from Valor Atomics, guys like, say, Matt Castle from Picogrid, guys like Josh Simon from Galvanic. The list goes on, right? Guys like like Soren from Neuros. Funny enough, by the way, if you don't know, his company name and his first name, it's backwards. Yeah. Just a little bit of lore there. But yeah, guys like all of these fellas, guys like Cam Schiller from Rangeview, very, very lucky that we all push each other to be better. It is very frequently we will we get breakfast together and we hang out after work, and I work in the same building as Augustus, and like some of these guys live together. It is awesome where we are all on our own individual missions. Very much like in One Piece, by the way, just saying.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring it back to. Yeah.
Everybody kind of has their own individual mission to be the very best at the one thing that they're focused on, but we're all rowing in the same direction. And that same direction is human prosperity. We're all pushing in that direction to win for humanity. And it's reinforcing that, some of our missions are like somewhat aligned, right? There is some crossover episodes sometimes, which is really cool when it happens. But by and large, a lot of what we do is very perpendicular to each other. So we don't really overlap in the day to day very frequently, aside from the way that some of what we work on might impact or relate to government policy, or might get involved in the same events, like Aaron Slodov of Atomic Industries. He and I are very aligned on American manufacturing. So we do events together. He's a very, very good friend. So there are things like that where we do have a frequent crossover, but aside from that, it is basically just building out this community, mutual respect for everybody pushing to be the best at what they're doing. And we encourage other people every opportunity that we can to join the community and do the same. Pick your mission and we will help you thrive. And it's the only thing you have to do is pick a mission. Just go pick something hard to work on and go do it. Teddy Feldman, working on a mining company, up and coming. There is no limit to hard problems that humanity needs to solve. The limit is how many people decide that they want to work on. So, very welcoming to people in that bit.
Yeah. It's just very clear that, so this is one of my facts that I share rarely because I don't know that I would do it again. I was in a fraternity in college in the South, which is a whole host of things that are pretty shitty, but there are some things about it that are beautiful, which is that if you go back to the founding of why they existed or why this fraternity existed, it was coming off the Civil War. It was to rebuild bonds between men who had previously been at war with each other, and to try and find common ground again. And At the time, it was religion, brotherhood, ritual, wholesome things. Fraternities became their whole own up thing. And so, whatever, we'll set that aside for a moment. But that's my best proxy that I have lived through for what I see you all building, is that there's this kind of fraternity, not that it has to only be men, but there's this kind of fraternity founding that has its own culture, its own language. Y'all are playful. You use these like base terms and winning. And like, you did the bus tour down to the American Dynamism event. And, I see you having fun. I see you building a culture, and it's clearly unique to you. And what I love about what you just said, though, is that it's not a closed society. Like, there's a very clear entry point. Pick a mission. We will support you. We want you to be a part of it. And that, to me, is the big difference, is that an open invitation to join us and be part of this and build something special and build a better future. That is generative. That is productive. That is something that like people should want to be a part of, I think. And I think that's awesome. I guess it's just an affirmation to say, I think it's awesome.
I appreciate that. Yeah, dude, we got guys coming into the factory, day in, day out, just stopping by. We got new people opening up new facilities all around El Segundo, which is super exciting. One of the newest additions, Bridget Mendler. She's awesome. She's working on a really, really cool company. But yeah, there is no limit to the number of people that can come in and work on hard problems. So our whole perspective is just like, we can be positive sum. We do not have to fight over resources. The resources are boundless. Like there is actually, and founders have this, and I had this problem for a long time. Not exactly this problem. I had a related problem. But a lot of people think that like capital is more scarce than opportunities. But in fact, good opportunities to invest are way, way more uncommon than capital. Capital is actually very, very common. And so a lot of founders, when they're first starting out, are like, oh my God, like there's, there can only be one winner in this space, or there can only, like VCs look at it from this perspective too. Like there can only be like one or two winners in this space. Or like, oh my God, how am I going to raise money for this thing? It's like so hard to convince VCs to like do the thing. It's all about like the frame of reference you use for like understanding like capital versus opportunities. And what people try to do is they try to get the capital first without having like really like latched onto an opportunity. And I made that mistake for a little while with the factory, where like I was trying to raise the money first and then build the factory. Whereas like the real thing to do is like start to like capture an opportunity, and capital will just flow. And I think what we try to encourage a lot of people to do is just like start building. Like we'll help you get the capital. We'll help you figure it out. Just like start building, start winning. And there are compounding effects to doing that.
I love it. I wanted to read a quote back to you, and then I'm going to end with my typical 3 questions. So I think you said this to Matthew Good for a series I read on LinkedIn. I want to work with people who are serious. They take what they do seriously without taking themselves too seriously. They can laugh at themselves and at other people, but they take their work and place in the world seriously. As a human, I believe I have a responsibility to humanity to do the best that I can, to do better than I can. I try to surround myself with other people like that. I just thought that was such a great encapsulation of what it is that you're doing, both in building community, the people you're trying to find to join your team. And after having spent this time with you, I think it's just like a reflection of your spirit and what you're setting out to do. Sometimes I think hearing our own words repeated back to us makes them even more powerful than when we said them originally, because they just kind of come to us. So I wanted to share that with you.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, it's kind of funny. It is funny hearing somebody else say those words. Sometimes I just say stuff and then, like off the cuff. But I very, very heavily believe in those words. I very, very much like to work with people and surround myself with people who are serious with a capital S and not serious with a lowercase s. Serious with a capital S meaning somebody who, like you said, like takes their place in the world seriously and is a serious person about affecting change, but like is able to laugh at themselves, is able to like joke around, and does not like think that they're all that. And the number, like as I started to meet more and more interesting people, I found like there's actually a large portion of serious people that do not take themselves so seriously. And that gives me a lot of hope for the future of humanity, that there are some really, really incredible people out there doing really incredible work. A lot of those people have already made it. who don't take themselves super serious, who are willing to go out of their way to help others, who are willing to take themselves down a peg and get their hands dirty and don't think that they're above doing work that other people who do take themselves too seriously think might be beneath it. And I think it's very, very, very important that no matter how high you travel in your successes, you always maintain that level of humility that you should and can, like you can and should be willing to go down and do the work of the newest employee on your team. You as a founder should be able to do every single job on your team. Maybe not optimally. Like I cannot write code nearly as well as like my co-founder, my brilliant CTO, Peter. But I can write code. I mean, I am our sales guy right now, right? Like as we grow, I might not be the best person to be doing the day-to-day sales. I'll still be doing all of our sales basically. I think Uber does this really well, right? I think everybody that does software or everybody on the Uber team in general has to drive a car for Uber. I think that's very, very important. Like you have to be connected to the problems. You can never let yourself. Icarus is an interesting example of this, where like Icarus flew too close to the sun and fell. I think you always have to maintain a physical foundation connecting yourself to the earth, so that because if you end up being disconnected from reality, you end up eventually getting to a point where that disconnection leads you to make decisions, which ends up toppling whatever you spent your life building. So I think it's very, very important to maintain that connection.
And if nothing else, what I've seen is that even if it doesn't crumble everything that you've built, the alternative is that it crumbles you internally, that you really lose touch with who you are and why you got in this thing to begin with. Okay, 3 questions for you to wrap up. What I find is that a lot of times people do these interviews over and over, and you've been doing a great job. You're promoting the company, helping build your reputation, and you never really get asked that one question you wish someone would finally pull out and that you could answer. And I'm curious if there's a question you wish I would have asked that you'd love to answer here at the end.
It's kind of funny. You actually sometimes people ask questions that like I somewhat ignore and I just kind of ramble on my own tangent anyway. Like I think I did that probably like multiple times during this chat. Maybe it was like tangentially related, but like I don't think I've ever like talked about my childhood play Roblox. I don't think at any level of intimacy whatsoever. So it was really nice that I got to talk about that. I don't think I ever really have. I think I got to talk a lot about a lot of stuff that I don't think I've talked about before, which is pretty great for me. I think if there were another question that I wish somebody would ask me, it might have been about. No. I don't think there's actually anything quite missing. I think actually quite. Yeah. I think the Roblox question might be like what video games did you play as a kid that influenced you and your perspective on the world? I think that the answer to that would be the story I told. I think that might be like one thing. Yeah.
I love it. Okay, cool. All right. So the second one is the name of the entity that I operate under is called Unbearably Beautiful Futures. It's based on this concept that we have agency, but in order to use that agency to do good, we have to embrace the vulnerability of hope, that we have to envision things that are so much better than they are today, that maybe they're a little scary, that maybe they frighten us a little bit, or maybe we shy away from them because we don't want to like hope for it that much. I don't get the sense that you have quite that problem, that you're a little bit more of a builder, but I'm curious what your version of, an unbearably or an incredibly beautiful future is that you're trying to build.
A quadrillion humans in the stars. It is the Foundation series. I know we touched on it briefly. It's out. It is a humanity so interplanetary, so vastly integrated that we forget where we came from in the first place. I think that's beautiful. I think humanity understanding more fundamental principles underneath the how and why, I think that is beautiful. But I think the best way to do that is to populate more. I think there needs to be hundreds, thousands of orders of magnitude more humans. I think we need literally to raise it to like a couple of exponentials. I think that would be beautiful. I think so many humans that humanity splinters off into its own branches of history that are disconnected from one another is beautiful. But it makes you wonder, right? Like how has that happened already? I don't know. That'd be kind of cool. Kind of neat. I think that's a great place to start for that. Something I've always been super fascinated by is sort of these like not alternative, but I'm a huge fan of sort of like archaic, hidden history, like history that we uncover and you're like, like that's the thing. I think there are histories that we have not tied reality to yet that we have like faint whispers of. I think concepts like Atlantis, concepts like pre-ice age human societies that were like eradicated. I think there's truth in myths. I so deeply want to connect with those histories and those stories, and I want to know what happened. I want to know what happened to make people come up with the story about this. Like, what was the actual thing? And I think being able to tie that sort of hidden past to a vastly enumerated future where we know both, or where we have a accurate recollection of the past and a very like just massively expansive future, I think that's beautiful. And whatever I can do to help that, I will put my life towards.
Love that. All right, last question. Work to me is one of the most transformative forces we have in our lives. We spend most of our time at work and it changes us in the process. And so I'm curious, as you're doing this work from where you stand right now, who are you becoming through the work that you're doing at Dirac?
That's a good question. Who am I becoming through my work at Dirac? I am trying to become somebody that people can rely on, somebody who can affect change and bring our country and our society in line with a much more serious perspective on affecting a more expansive version of humanity. I think through Dirac, I've become a much more, I love to push other people to be the best versions of themselves. And I think starting Dirac and hiring a team and becoming somebody who other people ask questions of, I think that has put me in a position where I can push more people to be the best versions of themselves. And that to me is very, very special. I can help unlock the greatness in other people, or I try to help unlock the greatness in other people. Because I think maybe to a fault even. Like I think I am one of the most optimistic people on the planet about reality and about people. I think everybody is capable of greatness, should they so choose to realize it. And I think one of the most important things that starting the company has helped me realize is I have the ability to help. I've heard the word coaching before. I don't know if I'm like a coach. I don't know if I definitely not like experienced enough to call myself that, but I think I can help other people realize that they are capable of that. And that to me is something very, very truly special about a position I'm in. I'm very, very fortunate that I can start to be that for other people.
That's awesome, man. It's one of the most wonderful and sometimes heavy gifts of leadership is that you have this incredible opportunity to build people up, and it's a responsibility. You know, people are counting on you. And so having that perspective that it's part of your job to help them realize what they're capable of and to help them realize that potential. I think it's a really awesome way to set out to build the company. So thanks for joining me today. This is an awesome conversation, exactly what I was hoping for.
Thank you for having me. This was fun. I got to talk about a lot of cool stuff. It's really fun. Thank you, Barrett.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Good Work. This show is created by me, Barrett Brooks, your host, and it's produced by my friends over at Podcast Royale. To subscribe to future episodes of the show, check out the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts, and hit that subscribe button. My guest today was Fil Aronshtein. You can find his work at diracinc.com. That's DIRACINC.com. And Phil's a great follow on Twitter if you're on that platform. You can, as always, find all of the topics that we talked about, a summary of the show, quotes, clips, and links to everything that we covered in the show notes at goodworkshow.com. Make sure to check those out, and you can also find all past episodes and the show notes for those episodes there as well. If you enjoyed today's show, please consider sharing it with a friend, someone who might find this conversation interesting or inspiring. And if you're feeling extra generous yourself, you can also leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or leave a comment on YouTube. Leaving those reviews helps other people find us. It feeds the algorithm of engagement on those platforms. And that means I can reach new audience with the show, which just makes it more fun for everyone. To get my Saturday newsletter on becoming a world-class leader, you can subscribe on my homepage at barrettbrooks.com. While you're there, you can find all of my writing and other work, as well as check out my coaching work at barrettbrooks.com/coaching, where I work with founders and creators to help them become the leaders that their customers and team deserve. Thanks again for tuning in today. Can't wait to see you on the next episode.